we're talking about God's dead end. And this morning, as we'll see in just a moment, specifically, we're going to deal with why God would take us the wrong way. Why God would take me the wrong way. And we'll get into that in just a few moments. But in preparation this morning, as I was kind of going over things and thinking about things, I wanted to address why I'm giving this set of lessons. Number one is we're going to look at more specifically, life does get really messy. And we end up places we never wanted to be. And we're going to address that in a little more detail in a few more moments. But the reason I think this series of lessons is so important is because we as Christians, or you as Christians, must understand what God has in store for us. Generally speaking, as Christians, and I think we're all right, and pretty good at getting a grasp on the idea that Jesus Christ died for me so that I can be something pretty special. Or maybe because I'm special, Jesus died for me. And we understand that concept of salvation and what that means and what it took. But I think there's another side of this that sometimes we forget and we kind of shove down under the surface that I really want to make sure that we grasp a hold of, and that even more importantly, that we have it deep within our hearts. And that is that God has a purpose, that God has an intent for this congregation here. And God has purpose, and God has intent for you as a Christian. I mean that regardless of where your life is, where all the clutter and all the messiness that's in your life, all the things that aren't going well, that God plans on using you to do great things. Now, it's interesting. I make statements like this periodically, and I see some eyes that are kind of intrinsic or questioning and interested. And then I see this look from at least half of you every time I say those kind of things. It kind of glazes over. That says, here Mike goes again. He thinks I can accomplish something in my life. There's a great German poet, difference. A great German poet that made this statement. I believe it's along the lines of what we talked about in our Bible study this morning. See a man or treat a man as he is, and he will become worse. And ladies, I don't mean to leave you out because we're talking about mankind. But see a man as he could be, and he will become what he should be. And that's exactly what Jesus Christ did. Number one, he sees mankind, he sees you as an individual as what you can be. And he made an investment in you as you are, or at your very worst, believing in what you could be. And I believe that when we accept that as our identity, when we truly believe that we as a congregation, that we as the body of Christ will become what we should be. And not until then. You see, Les Brown says that most people don't fail because they aim too high and miss. They fail because they aim too low and hit. And yet many others don't aim at all. And as a congregation, as individual Christians, I think it's time we embrace the ugliness that we have. And I believe that it's far past time that we embrace the beauty that we are to become as individuals and as a congregation. Now, inevitably, there is a small, not so silent or still voice in the back of your head saying, Paul, don't forget about, what, you're really not that good of a person. And if you try, what's really going to happen, right? This isn't just Paul's voice, right? And I don't have a direct line to Paul's mind, so I'm pretty sure, though, there's a voice in there saying something just about like that. Because when we look at our lives, if we are not delusional, I think we see a lot of messes. And we kind of introduced this idea last week. How are your finances as you start 2021? Have you met and are on track for all your goals? Well, there's maybe one or two that in your mind has said, yeah, I'm doing all right. What about your relationships? Children, are you the kind of students you know you can be? The kind of daughters that you should be? I've got a head shaking yes for one of these. It's got little cat ears back there. And the probability is that each of us at one or two of these categories is going to say, yeah, I've got that, one or two, and then we're going to talk about all the rest, right? Am I the husband that I should be? Am I the wife that I should be or want to be? Do I treat people around me the way I ought to do? What about the things that are outside of my control? What a topic for 2021 as the pandemic has led us into even more and wonderful challenges in our lives, right? Is everything in my life the way it's supposed to be? The answer is no. I know it's no. And so what does that mean? What does it mean for me as a Christian? What does it mean for us as a congregation in my life? Last week, when we talked about God's dead end, because something I hope to really draw out throughout this series that we started last week is God at times leads us right into dead ends. And last week, we looked at the idea that God is in control. So even when things aren't good, it doesn't mean that God is not in control. And today, I'm going to ask the question, why would God lead me to a dead end? Or why would God lead me in the wrong direction? Because we're going to acknowledge that some of the clutter, some of the mess in my life is because of what I've done. But newsflash, a lot of it is because you are where God intends you to be. Even the clutter, even the mess, even the things that aren't right. To illustrate this so well, this point, before we get into it in depth, Stephanie said last week, what about the Hagars of the Bible? I say her name, her head shoots up in panic because she's afraid that what I'm going to say. But last week, Sunday night, she said, what about the Hagars of the Bible? You see, Hagar wasn't in the position Hagar was in because of Hagar. And there's times there's a lot of our life that is not the way we'd like it to be, not the way we think it should be, because that's where God has taken us. And so we talked, as I said, about God being in control, and today we are going to address the issue of why would God take us the wrong way, to be followed, Lord willing, next week by what to do in times of waste. But for today, why would God lead me the wrong way? I appreciate that David and his whole family is back with us today. I'm glad Naomi's feeling better. I appreciate them reading this passage, but I'm going to read it one more time because it is our fundamental lesson or concept to bring this lesson out. In Exodus 13, starting in verse 17, this is after the 10th and final plague. When Pharaoh lets the people go, we read, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that way was near. Now, I don't know what you think the Israelite people were going through, but something I think's easily overlooked is this concept. Evie oftentimes talks about wanting a lot more height. Right? She and Anna have been the same age since about Anna was 2 years old, or at size, I mean, even though their age is not the same, right? And she would have loved, she was excited, she finally wore out or grew out some of the clothes she's had for 3 years this year. One of the things that she would like to do is to dunk the basketball. Right? Now, we have these goals like this we set sometimes, and I use these youthful goals not because they're silly. Sometimes we tell children that, right? But we sell them short in doing so. But we see the goals in this way. Here's where I am. Here's what I want to do. And there's not a whole lot of thought about what's in between those two things. Right? Here's where I am, Kevin. I'd like to be a coal tycoon. No, he says. There's a lot of steps that would come in between there, right? Here's where I am. Here's what I'd like to do. 2 points of location, right? God says to the Israelites, I'm going to take you from Egypt and I'm going to put you in Canaan. Did he lie? But notice this. They aren't going to Canaan. Why? They were concerned about 2 points. But there's a lot of steps in the middle. And from their perspective, God is leading them the wrong way. God did not lead them through the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Now, we noted last week that they are ready for battle. Verse 18. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. How many things in your life have you said to yourself, God, I'm ready for? I just don't understand why it's not here yet. Let me ask you, if you are under the age of 16, how many of you are ready to drive today? If mom and dad would just let you. 1, 2, 2 honest, 3 honest. Tanner, you are 10 years old today. It's Tanner's birthday. He's not 9 anymore. Who said 9? No, I'm not talking to you. It's not all about you. We'll get to that point later. Tanner, you're 10 years old. Are you ready to drive or what? No? Yeah, I thought so. I used that illustration last week. They are ready. Right? These Israelites, they walk out, they got sword. We're ready to go to Canaan. We're ready to whoop those guys up, and we're ready to take what we have coming. Hold on. You can flip your Bibles ahead, and in a little bit we're going to be into Numbers. I think it's, I won't give you the chapter because I'm going to tell you wrong, but we're going to be there in just a little bit. We can flip ahead months in the story because we have the ability to do that looking back. And guess what? Now they're at the Jordan River. It's time to actually cross the river and do what they think they're ready to do. And what do? Maybe not. In fact, no, let's not do that. You see, there are things that you think you're ready to do, that you are all prepared for, that you just don't understand why they aren't there in your life, and yet the wiser, more knowledgeable mind You see the illustration? Knows that it's not time. There are going to be times that God takes us away from where we want to go. There are times in our lives that God takes us away from where we are supposed to be, what He wants for us in our lives, because that's what we need. There are times that there is going to be pain, that there is going to be illness, that there is going to be hurt, that there's going to be failure in our life, because we need the lessons we are going to gain before we receive the blessings that we have our eyes on. Verse 19, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. You know, we're going to deal with tonight Abram's covenant with God. God says to Abram, I'm going to give you this land. We're going to see in a little bit, he never sees the fulfillment of that prophecy. Did God lead him the wrong way? From his perspective, human perspective, absolutely. You see, Joseph knew the promise. Joseph says, I'm going to be there. But as he's dying, he says, listen, God's going to visit you. He's going to fulfill his promise. You take my bones. You see, Joseph got led the wrong way. But that was all right with Joseph, because he understood God had him right where he was meant to be. Why does God take us the wrong way? Number one, I think that it is okay, or that it is fine to question God. I'm curious, how many of you have been told never to question God? At least half the hands are up. And mine's not up just for illustration. Never question God. You know what? I can't think of a more unbiblical statement than that. The Bible is full of people questioning God. Now, the way we question God is important, isn't it? Remember when we started this lesson, I was talking to you about embracing what God has for us to do and what God is going to accomplish in your life and by your life and through your life. And some of us, and probably to one degree or another, all of us sat there and we said, I don't see that happening. How is that supposed to take place? Here we are in Podunk, Summerville. Population of 342 and shrinking. I made that number up. I don't know why Becca's laughing. Brookville's not far behind. Right? And I'm nobody. God, how do you think that's going to happen? Or maybe you were questioning me. Or if you're questioning how God can use you, God, how's that supposed to happen? Or, in the other side, sorry, Mike, I didn't even realize our whole division here we had going. This is the good side for this illustration. Or we say, yeah, or how that's going to happen. See the difference? Both are questioning, aren't they? If you would turn your Bibles to Luke, the first chapter. You know, right here in Luke, there's two very important people, both of which are questioning God. And we see two very different situations coming out of this questioning. Luke 1, verse 18. Now, Zechariah, I'll get it out. Now, Zechariah said to the angel. Now, who's Zechariah? Who's his son? That's what I'm getting at. John the Baptist. Zechariah said to the angel, how shall I know this? Now, in our podcast, it's going to come out this coming Thursday. I mentioned to Amy Himes, who's in there, she reads about the betrayal of Jesus. And she reads it just like you and I always read it. We just read straight down through there, right? As though it's just letters and page. But when you read those things and you put in your mind what it must have been like for Jesus to say, friend, will you betray me with a kiss? There's some emotion behind that. When Jesus says, I am greatly distressed, he didn't say, I'm greatly distressed, right? There's living beings behind those statements on our pages. And there's living statements behind what Zechariah says. The angel Gabriel says to Zechariah, you are going to have a son. Well, guess what, Gabriel? Elizabeth is barren and has been for a very long time. Just how do you think that's going to happen? Now, I may be wrong on the backdrop of what Zechariah's form of questioning is. But the reason I believe that is Gabriel's response. I am Gabriel, and I am here speaking for God, and that'll be the last time you speak until you see it. That's one way of questioning God. Turn over one page, same chapter if you would, verse 34. Now, we have a young lady here, and Mary said to the angel, now I asked you who Zechariah's son was. Who's Mary's son? Jesus. Now, Mary said to the angel, how will this be since I am a virgin? Response of the angel is very different to Mary, isn't it? How will this be? Now, here's what blows my mind. An older barren woman given birth or a virgin, which is more unlikely? Barren, as in non-producing, Sharon. Oh, okay, I wasn't sure. Barren or virgin? There's some people going like this. Well, I call it, Amanda gets mad at me for using this term. But think, and I can't think of, as soon as I say this, there's going to be some here. I call them afterlife children. Amanda slaps me and says, you mean late life children. At that point, life's just over, right? Older, non-barren women give birth periodically. It's been claimed, but there's none since Mary. And Mary, I believe, is asking, how will this be? I ask you, when you think about what we are going to accomplish, what you are going to accomplish as a Christian. Sorry, Mike. I was going to cross my arms. I looked right at you. I realized your arms are crossed. How's that supposed to happen? Yep. Or, how's that going to happen? See the difference? There's difference in the way we question God, and I believe it comes down to our faith in the situation. Sometimes it's my doing. I wanted to say earlier Numbers 12, and that's why I didn't say it, because it's in Numbers 14, if you want to turn there. These people are delivered in every which way. And they've been upset for quite some time about God taking them the wrong direction, in the wrong way. And finally, here they are. You think you want it. Here it is. And here's what happened. Verse 14, starting in 1. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept all night. You want to know something about these Israelites that came out of Egypt? They were a dramatic bunch. They're upset that they're being asked to go into the promised land. They're not just going to complain. They wept and cried loudly all night long. There's a form of protest for you, right? Moses has to camp right there with them. Verse 2, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we have died in the land of Egypt, or we'd rather would have died in Egypt, or would we that died in the wilderness? I'd rather died in the wilderness. Verse 3, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. You want to make something dramatic? Talk about the wives and little ones, right? I told you they were a dramatic bunch. They will become prey. What? Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Whew. Now there's questioning of God. I ask you, because I can't hit what really is hurting in your life. But there are things that either have started to break you or on the brink of breaking you, and you're saying to yourself, it's all loss. There's no hope from here. There's no recovery from here. And remember last week we dealt with the idea that God's had your back and He's going to have your future. When we find ourselves having gone the wrong way, sometimes we need to realize it's our own doing. You see, these people are dragged back out into the wilderness because of their own doing, because they will not step forward to do what God has had them do. Now, the first time they went the wrong way was not their doing. We'll end on this point, but I'll give you a glimpse ahead. It was meant to be a time of preparation. And they had not properly prepared in the past, and now their present is a wreck. But let me draw your mind to someone else. All those young individuals under the age of 21 are also standing there in this congregation of Israel, their parents and grandparents are refusing to do what they're supposed to do, and because of that, they're dragged out into the wilderness for 40 years. You see, for those young ones, for the older ones, let me say, they're dragged out to die. The young ones are dragged out to learn more lessons and to prepare, to do what should have been done 3 years prior, from the time we were at Mount Sinai and on. Hebrews 11, 13, and 16, talking about Abram and those other forefathers, makes this statement that I think is a beautiful contrast and a distinction for what we want to be as Christians when we find ourselves in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong way, doing the wrong things. Hebrews 11 talks about all those patriarchs, of which Abram's mentioned, who did not see the promise. I alluded to that earlier. He was promised this land. He never saw it. He was promised to be a blessing to all nations. While he was alive on earth, he never saw it. But what does it say? He never turned his eyes back to where he came from, because he was pushing forward to a better city or higher city whose foundations are not made by man. You see the difference between the Israelites and Abram? Between the faithful and those who draw back to perdition? One is saying, it can't be done, I'm going back. Here's what's interesting about life. No matter how bad your life is, it wasn't better before Jesus. No matter how trying the Israelite situation was at this time, it wasn't better in Egypt. But yet they're going to go back. I think we need to grasp that we need to accept the idea that God takes us the wrong way at times. And I put that in quotations. I say that because the Israelites need to go north and just a little bit east to get to Canaan. And God took them south and a whole lot east. And then he took them around in circles the whole time. I don't know how you define that other than a wrong turn. Believe me, if I'm driving and Amanda's in the passenger seat, that's exactly how she's going to describe it. And God will take us the wrong direction from our perspective. You don't think so? What about Job? Who did nothing wrong and yet found his life crushed. Why? Because God took him that direction. You say, well, hold on. That was Satan, remember? Satan did all the affliction. Go back to chapter 1. We don't have time this morning and read. God says to Satan, have you seen my servant Job? It is God that first brings Job up. He says, hey, Satan, look at Job. What about him? Took a big detour in his life, didn't he? Hebrews 8 and 7. We dealt with Romans, the 10th chapter today in verse 5 that talks about the justification by the law. I dealt with the fact that in all the thousands of years of the law being in place, one person ever accomplished what the law set out to do. One person, Jesus Christ. The chances of you doing that, the chances of me doing that, chances of them doing it was zero. Why, God? Why would you do that? Hebrews 8 and 7 says that if there was no fault with the first, there would have been no need to seek a second, speaking about the first law versus the second law. Why would God lead all these people in the wrong direction? Well, ultimately, it's not wrong in light of eternity. It's wrong in my eyes. And as we'll see in a few minutes, God has a different perspective. As we think about me, I need to accept that some of my failures, some of the problems in my life, some of the wrong direction, some of what not getting where we want to be is going to be by God. How many of you, as it pertains to the church, and we've talked about having better goals and more appropriate goals and numbers, how many of you would like to see this place just absolutely packed with 130 people this morning? Heads nod. Have you thought to realize that we couldn't handle that? What's that? Build on. But the infrastructure would collapse. We went from where we are now to that overnight. We wouldn't have the skills, the infrastructure. I keep bringing this up. We barely have the teachers. Someone, I heard whisper teachers. We barely have the teachers to teach the kids we have now. See, when we think about growth, we need to think about in realistic ways. Are we preparing for the future? That's the point. Because God just isn't going to throw us in this situation. I like the way Mike's thinking. Hey, we'll build on. We'll do. Yes, we will. We will. Today, yesterday, and tomorrow. Right? Every step of the way. But we'd like it the easy way. We'd like it the easy way. And my life's no different. There's things I'd want. I wish that I could do 100 times better preaching. I asked the kids on the Zoom meeting last Monday night to each give something good, something they're good at. Then I realized I had to start the process, and I scratched my head, and Tucker says, "What about preaching?" Well, it's something I do, right? I wish I could be better. And I certainly hope by the end of 2021 I'm better than I was at the beginning. That's my aim. That's my goal. But just getting to the end wouldn't keep it. God is willing to lead you down dead-end paths. He led those people right to the shore of the Red Sea with nowhere to go. Why? Number one, because of God's timing. Tonight we're going to deal with Genesis 15. But Genesis 15 deals with this promise he gave to Abram. And right there in that passage, I believe it's verse 16, after he says, "I'm going to give you all this land, Abram." Then he says, "But first, for 400 years, you're going to go into a strange land and be oppressed." What? You see, the people in Egypt, here's the reason this is important. The people in Egypt, for hundreds of years, were crying out to God, saying, "When, God?" He already had time in mind, didn't he? It was going to happen. He had them there for a reason. Who was that? Oh, I told Anna that. I was going to say I'm a little braver with my own, It's not, I was talking to Tanner. I said, it's not all about you. You know what? It's not just children that need to hear that. In fact, we adults need to hear that more than anyone, right? It's not all about me. God, why can't I have right now and get away with and do this and I want, and I... Well, it's not all about me. It's not all about you. That's why God would lead us the wrong way. You see, God has bigger things in mind, doesn't he? The Israelites being delivered from Egypt was a small step in a greater redemption plan. It wasn't all about them. And so his timing, for that reason, was different. He has a different perspective. Ephesians 1:4 says that he chose us in him before the foundation of the world. Oh, in a time where I can type a few letters onto my phone, I can even have my PowerPoint on there so I can review anywhere. And by tomorrow afternoon, have whatever that George Bezos sends me show up on my porch. It's hard to have patience, isn't it? But God's perspective is different. I want you to turn to Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, because maybe this is quite possibly the most important thing that I will read or discuss today. Verse 10 and 11, really 7 and continuing is on this topic, but 10 and 11, so that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might be known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. This was according to the eternal purpose that he's realized in Christ Jesus our Lord. There's a lot more in the verses prior that I'd love to draw out, but God's timing is because of his purpose. See, I said this a couple of weeks ago, and I think in times like this, when things are uncertain, maybe for the first time in our lives, some of you almost were in depression, so you may understand better than the rest of us. But things are uncertain. I said this a few weeks ago on Wednesday night. The whole world is watching. The world is watching how we deal with the pandemic. The world is watching how we as Christians deal with political unrest. The world is watching how we deal with loss. The world is watching how we deal with the challenges of our life. But did you catch what I read there? It's not just the world. Principalities and powers in heavenly places. That gets us to our next point. You are being watched. God's turnout. How many of you are familiar with that, turnout? That has to do with your attire. You see, I work in the fox hunting world, and they talk about turnout. She had no turnout. We tell her, get out of the field. You show up to hunt foxes, and you don't have the proper attire, you're told, get out. What kind of turnout's that? I used to tease them about showing up to hunt foxes with a 270 rifle, Jerry, and a fox call and western saddle on my horse. They made it very clear that if anything was shot, it may be me. Your turnout, how you appear. You see, God's got something in mind. People are watching, and principalities and powers are watching. 1 Peter. You talk about take-home message. This is it. 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, verses 11 and 12. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. And then look what we're talking about. So that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Did you catch that? How do I act towards my enemy? In a righteous manner. Why? So he sees what Christianity is about. So she sees what Christianity is about. So that on the day of visitation, it may turn. That term has a lot of meaning. You've seen all through our reading of the Old Testament. But for our application today, when God visits them, when God gives them the opportunity, they would turn and glorify him. These young ones are watching us today. These not so young ones are watching us today. The world is watching us today. Isn't that why Job was led down the wrong path? Because I was going to watch him. God and Satan were watching him. And throughout all of time, people have been watching him. And you are being watched. Secondly and last, or thirdly and lastly, as we conclude here today, God will lead us down the wrong path for training or a time of preparation. The Israelites had a lot that they needed to get addressed, that they needed to organize themselves. They had needed to become a nation. But they didn't take care of all the things that God gave them opportunity to take care of. And when the opportunity to seize the moment and to be great came before them, they couldn't do it. Because as you go through the latter part of the book of Exodus, all you hear is a bunch of crying, a bunch of whining, a bunch of complaining about what everyone else is doing wrong. Moses and Aaron, the world, the Amalekites, all these people, no one's doing what I think they ought to be doing. And meanwhile, they never spend a day preparing for the challenges that went before them. I understand you have difficulties in your life. Use them to become what God wants you to be. This evening, if you're in need of submitting your life to Jesus Christ, I encourage you not to delay it, but rather do it now so you can properly prepare not only for the challenges coming, but the glory that one day will be revealed in those who are his. If you're subject to that invitation, then please come forward as together we stand and sing.